call it a verbal learning assessment if you'd like. We'll call it a quiz if you want to, whatever you want to call it. Hi. How many different sections of the Jewish wedding are there?
3.
3. Very good. And you don't have to know what they are called. We practice them a little bit, but what are they generally? What's the first one?
Courtship. The parents giving the business.
Exactly. Kind of like the courtship, right? Yep.
Yeah,
The shluchin.
yeah.
And then there you go. Yeah. Then what's the second one? Which is where we're at now?
The ketubah.
Close. The ketubah. No, that's okay. We're going to talk about that in a minute, though.
The contract.
That's the contract.
Yeah.
But the section of the wedding, that middle section of the wedding, is the engagement. We think of it as the engagement, the espousal, the betrothal. Exactly. That's where we are now in the bridal relationship. Okay, we're separated from our groom, only able to talk to him by the messenger, and we have little gifts that we've been given until he comes back, right? And each person, when they go under the chuppah, which we know is an outward showing of that personal relationship that we chose for marriage, which we can liken to baptism, we get that thing, and everybody's is different. It says that some people are given the gifts of this, and they're given the gifts of that, and given the gifts of this. And so I want to go a little bit off track and then come back again. Okay, what did Jesus say to James and John when they said, "Hey, can we sit on your left hand?" Remember what he said?
He said, "That's my spot."
And of God, he says, "Are you willing to be baptized the way that I'm going to be baptized?" And that struck me as strange, right? Because yes, we were baptized. You were baptized of John. We're baptized of John. But he wasn't talking about that. He's talking about a second baptism. And do you know what that second baptism is? I'm not speaking heresy here. I can prove this out in the scriptures, okay? There are 2 baptisms. And we're not promised, that's the song, "He never promised you a rose garden," right? He doesn't promise us that. In fact, what he promises us is that our works will be tried by fire. Baptism by fire. Have you heard this term? Baptism. Now let's talk about that. Let's actually look into it. What does that mean? He talks about us being a vessel occasionally, right? And how do they make vessels? They make it from pottery. And in order to make you find the right kind of clay, you fashion it the way you want to. And he talks about how the master fashions us with his hands, right? And then you can use the wonderful piece of clay for something that's good, right? No. What do you have to do to it first? You have to fire it. Now, we think of it as putting it into a kiln. We think of this big round thing with lots of heat inside it. But that's not how they did it before. Well, the way, there's this really cool show. I'm digressing from my digression now. There's this really cool show called Time Team. And they're British archaeologists that take over a site, and they go through some of the ways that things were done that meet the era of the dig that they're doing. And they talked about pottery. They found this field, and it was filled with shards of pottery. And normally an archaeologist goes, "Whoa, this means that it's dated to this." And one shard can tell you a lot about what. And they were finding them everywhere. And what the guy said was, what we found is a potter's field. A potter's field? What is that? I've heard the term, right? Because those are fairly inexpensive. A potter's field is usually what they use for burial, not for agricultural, right? A potter's field is cheap. Well, what happens is, when you fashion a vessel, and they actually did it on the show, you put the vessels, we'll call them green because they haven't been fired yet. They're green, and they stack rocks around them, and then they put firewood over it. And then they stack more vessels, put rocks around them, put firewood over it. Stack more vessels, put rocks around them, so you can get this very tall thing, and then you fire it, you burn it. okay? And then you dig through, you sift through the ashes to find the vessels that lived through the fire. Those that didn't, those that broke, you throw them out into the potter's field. Makes sense, right? So when we are tried so as by fire, we either break or we come out to be a useful vessel. Interesting. Now, baptism so as by fire. He also talks about the fire that comes, and all of our works are as wood, hay, and stubble. What is a stubble? I'm not talking about like 3 days of growth. No, Jed, you don't have any. or ouch. The ref's going to start taking away points for hitting below the belt here. So what stubble is it's the leftover small brown grass, right? You mow the hay, the leftover is the stubble. Wood, we know what that is. We know what hay is. And we know that it burns. Those are all things that will be consumed by fire. And what's left when it talks about that trial as by fire is not the wood, hay, and stubble of our works, but what? The silver of the works of us through God or through Jesus, those leftover things. Now, I'm going to go back to a little bit of, this is really important, and this is when a foundry occurs, and you can do a small crucible in a propane burner, and you can melt down pop cans and make really cool ingots from aluminum or whatever. You can get the windings out of a motor and build copper ingots. But when you're doing silver, okay, or any of these metals, you're throwing the metals in there. They're a pop can's got paint on it, so that floats to the top. And what's that stuff called? Do you guys know? Dross. Dross. D-R-O-S-S. Dross. And it is up to the person who's firing the metals to pull off the dross. Okay? It's kind of a scummy skim. It comes off, you throw it away, comes off, throw it away. How do you know when you have enough dross drawn off? What's that? It's clear to a point where he can see his reflection in it. Take just a second and think about that. The dross that God takes off of us comes off, and what does he see? He sees his reflection in us through baptism by fire. Wow. Isn't that cool? That was free. Okay. Ketubah.
That's the last part, I guess.
No, that's the contract. Go ahead. Nisuin. Yeah. That's the taking up, right? Where the groom comes down and the bride comes out to meet him, and that's the taking up. And the big ceremony and the meal and all that, 7 days, right? So let's talk about the ketubah. How many ketubahs are there? How many ketubahs are there? 3. Wow. How did you know that? So there are 3 ketubahs, and in the Old Testament, in the ancient Jewish tradition, where did those 3 copies go? To the bride? To the bride, to the groom, and the court. So we are brides to our groom, Jesus. Do we have a ketubah? Oh, first of all, what's on the ketubah? Do you remember that?
Property ownership and stuff they bring in.
Prenuptials, vows, that kind of stuff. Exactly. Promises. Let's just put it that way. If you do this, I will do that. Okay? Where is our ketubah with Jesus? There's got to be 3. What do you think? There's no wrong answers because I asked you, what do you think?
This is not the Holy Spirit.
Good, but thanks for playing. No, that was good. That's 3, right? Yeah, that's good. But let's look at it this way. There you go. I heard it. Say it. The Bible is 1 because, go ahead.
And then I'm going to guess 1 in heaven.
Where is that?
Next to the,
That'd be the court, the judgment.
There you go. And keep going.
she's just Take one off me.
Just help.
She's just doing word salads.
I'm gonna say the other one is in church.
No, it sort of is, but it's more specific and actually says where it's at, okay, in the Bible. So we've got one that's the Bible, and it is very similar to the law that was given to Moses in the Old Testament for the marriage of Israel to God. Our Bible is the Word of God, and that is not only the Old Testament, but the New Testament. Specifically, the New Testament is our ketubah, because it says what we as a bride have to do. And there are verses in there. In fact, I'll let you finish it. You already know it, but I'm going to share it with you. If you love me, that's the ketubah. That's our relationship. That's the promise. So what are the commandments? Well, they're right there, right? So turn to Hebrews, the 10th chapter. So we know where the first one is. It's the Bible. We know where the second one is, and we'll look at exactly where it's at in just a minute. But Hebrews, the 10th chapter says, this is the covenant, the ketubah, that I will make with them after those days. New Testament. 16, sorry, Hebrews 10:16. I thought you knew that. Hebrews 10:16. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. Where is the third ketubah? Right here. We know what's right. We are convicted of what's right. We have it written. That is ours. Okay? So we've got, the first one is the Bible. The second one is written in our hearts. Now turn to Revelations 20:12. Revelation 20:12. And Sister Shelley, since you got it right, you can read that if you want to.
2012. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened.
The books. But that's not all. Keep going.
And another book.
The other book. Sorry, am I interrupting you? But I love this stuff. Keep going.
Which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in these books.
According to their works. Now, are we saved by works?
No.
Our works are judged by our relationship with the groom. Interesting, isn't it? So, if you want to know what the groom promises us, you can go to 1 Peter, the first chapter, and read that. It talks about, I'm not going to get into it because of time. And if we want to know what is promised of the groom to the bride, well, first of all, the first one in 1 Peter is what we promise to do if we keep that commandment. And Revelation 2, starts in verse 7, he's talking to he that, is this familiar to you? He that hath an ear, let him hear. And then it finishes with, and this is what he says to the church. Okay? That is literally saying, this is what I'm going to promise you. And there's lots of them that are very interesting, and some of them we don't understand because it's prophecy. But one of them is, he will let us rule with a rod of iron. Okay? Now, what does that mean? What do you think that means? There's no wrong answer. You'd think so, right? But what do you use a rod of iron for?
Guiding.
Okay.
Separate.
Something.
To separate.
Separating.
Well, there's again, I'm trying to go quickly through this. In Psalms, it talks about, David says that we're going to rule the rod of, as with a rod of iron. And let me just read it real quick so I don't mess things up. Oh, yeah. There's just so much cool stuff I'm not going to be able to tell you guys. Okay, it says in verse 26, and he that overcometh and keepeth my works to the end, that's you keep the promise, to him I will give power over the nations. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I receive of my Father. Now, what does that mean? This is really, really very interesting, and then we're going to go into some new stuff here pretty soon. But the rod of iron. Now, do you think the rod of iron is a weapon?
Like what they use to grab the top of the metal.
Not really. So it's not because when this was written, people had spears and swords and arrows, and if you were to show up to a battle, your buddy would go, "Oh, good, I'm glad you brought a rod of iron." Geez, right? That's not the tool to be going out and fighting with. What it's for, and it says it's used as a hammer. It's going to break up the pottery of the nations. Now, what does that mean? That means that it doesn't matter what your nationality is. We're going to break all of those up, and we're going to have one theocracy. Can I use that word? Theo being God, ocracy being form of government. One government, and God is going to be the head, the ruler. He's going to set up his rule on the earth during his reign here on earth. And that's not now, that's later, that's prophecy. And that rod of iron is going to break all of the little fiefdoms up so that they all come together as one nation under God. And not the Pledge of Allegiance either. Okay, does that it make sense? And I encourage you to study that and dig into that chapter in Revelation that talks about what God promises us. And look in the Bible when it says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And what are the commandments? And what are the new commandments? And in fact, it was we were talking at home today, and Dad said, and I don't remember what the verse was, but it said that the new covenant. And if you read the law of Moses, you don't understand. You've got a veil over your face to see the new covenant. And so when we were talking about the Pharisees who had that veil, they refused to see the new covenant, that ketubah that we have with Jesus. We have that relationship, and knowing what is required of us is just as important, because yes, it's written on our heart, but it gets deeper and it gets more rich the more we understand it. Okay. Now, wow. Give me just a second here. Let's talk about what is our service to God? What is that, do you think? Worshiping him? The praise that we give him? Okay. How do we do that?
By reading his word.
Right. But we talked last night about the physical and the spiritual. Remember that? And we can do the physical stuff and not do the spiritual stuff. And are we worshiping him? Because the Bible says if we worship him in spirit and in truth. So the acts that we do are not what we're looking for. I know it's in here. I'm looking for it. I had to. You don't need it. It's okay. I'll find it. Ah, there it is. All right. So, worship and praise. Worship and praise are two different things. I'm going to give you a song. Tell me if it's a worship song or a praise song. Praise him, praise him. Praise song. Okay. That's a pretty easy one. Okay, you ready? What? Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Which is it?
Worship.
It doesn't really fit, does it?
Yeah, I guess that's.
So, what about I'll fly away, oh glory? It doesn't fit. So there's more than just praise and worship involved in our singing, which we say, oh yeah, it's worship singing. Well, it is and it isn't. Sometimes it's. Did you know what is the greatest song ever written? What's that, Beth? Freebird. No. Did you know who was the greatest songwriter ever? A little bit of history. Do you guys know who Bill Gaither is? You ever heard of him? He wrote a lot of the songs in our hymnal. He's still alive today, and he was voted by ASVAB, which is an acronym for American Song Association Publishers. He was voted as the most influential songwriter of the 20th century. Now, that includes Bob Dylan, that included Elvis Presley, that includes all those people. He was the most influential songwriter of the 20th century. Isn't that amazing? So he didn't write the greatest song ever. The greatest song ever was written by Moses when God said, write these things into a song and teach it to my people so they can sing it generation after generation. I'd like to know what that song is. I'd like to have it stuck in my head as an earworm, wouldn't you? But if I do, I would only have the veil on because it's not the New Testament. Turn to John, the 4th chapter, verse 24. Well, actually, don't do that. We've already said that verse. God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Romans, the 12th chapter, verse 1. This is where I want to go. And then we'll get back into talking about the Passover a little bit. Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. How many people have never heard that before in their life? It's a very common verse. It's a good verse, right? Excuse me. For lots of different reasons, it's a good verse. But I'm gonna open that box and get the $20 bill out for you. Okay, you ready? You see that last word in there? Service. Other places in the Bible, that word is translated as worship. Now, let's look at that verse, which is your reasonable worship. Doing all of those things, yeah, my body is a living sacrifice, reasonable service, no, reasonable worship. Do you know we bless God? God blesses us, right? Absolutely. We say, oh, I am blessed. But God blesses us, and we bless God. How do we do that? Can we give God something that gives him, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for your gift, for your bless. We kind of can.
The only thing we have to give is ourselves.
Which is ourselves, right? Exactly. How many people have pets? And I'm a dog guy. My wife is a cat person. But I'm a dog person, okay? And I'm gonna puppies, the smooshy face. You know what I'm talking about? Oh, smooshy face. And you scratch them and are they doing anything for you? But are you, exactly. They're blessing you in their happiness, in their being wanting to be around you. Okay? So sometimes all God wants us to do is jump up in his lap and show him your smooshy face. Or wag your tail, or thank you, God. That was awesome. Have you told your groom today that you loved him? There you go. A living sacrifice. What does that mean? Here's a test. This is a hard test. I'm going to ask you, Jewel. This is your test. Okay? Now, there are no wrong answers because I'm going to ask you what you would do. Okay? It is a lie because I'm going to trick you probably. So you're walking down the street and you've got 2 bottles of water. Neither one of them are open, but you're just walking along and you walk by someone who looks fairly thirsty on the side of the road. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe they don't have a lot of money. Maybe they're just, what do? Wrong. And here's why. Now, what is the right thing to do? What, I know, you're not wrong because that's what you would do, right? But let's think about this. That's okay. What you should do is pray about what you should do.
Hard when you're, hard to do. isn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, and it's hard on one side because it's been ingrained in us. If we want to do the Christian thing, we have to be a giver. On the other hand, what happens if you give and God's been working on the lady behind you who's walking, who also has one bottle, but isn't really thirsty, and he's been working on her because she's so selfish. And she was looking at this, it looks like I don't have to do it anyway. You see, we need to pray. And that's a simple thing, but anytime we take an action, we don't do it because it's the right thing to do, because it's our training. We present ourselves a living sacrifice. That means we say, Lord, what is it we need to do? I'm following you. Because if I give it to you because it's the right thing to do, when the fires come, it's all wood, hay, and stubble. But if I say, Lord, what is the right thing to do? Sometimes what seems like the wrong thing to do might be the right thing to do. So, whether you do or whether you don't is all dependent on that communication with God, not necessarily the training of the Christian thing to do, so to speak. Interesting. All right, let's talk about the Passover. And the Passover was the story, and we did the Passover when you guys were younger. Remember that? Actually did the whole thing here. And you were telling me the story about when we did the search for the unleavened bread. Remember that? And what happened after we were done? We found some croutons in the freezer. So, we're going to talk a little bit about each one of the steps, and we're going to talk a little bit about how the Passover that Jesus partook of as what we consider to be the Last Supper was different than the Passover that was established in the times of Moses. And the reason for it is because there were some symbolisms that were placed throughout the years and were put into it as tradition. Not wrong, but embellished is a good word to put, okay? So Exodus 12 explains the Passover, and it's one of 7 holidays that are throughout the year that says, of the Passover, it says that it shall be done forever. Does that mean until Jesus comes? Kind of means forever, doesn't it? In fact, Jesus says, I'm not going to drink of this again until when? I drink it anew with you. So there's a chance we could be doing Passover in heaven. Now, are we going to do it the way Moses did it? Or are we going to do it the way Jesus did it? Or is it going to be the new Passover? There's all kinds of things to think about. The Lord sent Moses to Pharaoh to serve as the deliverer of Israel, right? And he said, let my people go. And Pharaoh refused him how many times? Do you remember? How many plagues are there?
10.
There's 10 plagues. So, what's that? Yeah. 10 plagues. What was the last one? That's the big one, right? The angel of death. And what did he do? Killed the firstborn of every. Now we think, okay, the firstborn, that means the oldest son or daughter, but not just of the human race. It was of the flocks. Okay? What was the one way to get out of that plague? What was Goshen, you guys know where that's at? Not just out of Eugene, it's actually a place in Egypt where the Israelites were during their captivity, okay? And that land of Goshen was spared from all of the other plagues while it occurred, except for the 10th plague. That one came in. And the only people that were spared were the ones that did what? That put blood on their lintel and the doorposts, right? And there's a lot of, what's that?
And not on the ground.
And not on the ground, exactly, because we don't want flies. But did you know that they're doing some archaeology, and they've actually, this is true, but at more of a recent, they've done some archaeology and have found the land of Goshen. And they know this is where the Israelites were while they were in captivity. And guess what they found? They found the lentils. And guess what's on the lentils? Nameplates written into metal, and those nameplates are the last names or the family names of the Israelites. And they're just finding these as they go. These are the plates that were over the door. Very important. In fact, if you were considered, it was considered to be a disgrace to take the name off. So as people would leave or become disgraced in the community, the names would come off the door. So those are all traditions that they're finding now. But think about that. You've got this metal nameplate, and where did God say put the blood? On top of your name. So it's a personal thing. Not just my door, but the door with my name. Interesting. Right. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The 10th plague came. Only those families that sacrificed an unblemished male lamb and smeared its blood on the doorpost and the lintel would be passed over. Okay? Now, the Jewish term for that is Pesach or Pesach. I've heard it used both ways. From the impending death. And now Passover is actually called Pesach, which means it's actually translated loosely into the Feast of Freedom. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because it's celebrating the Passover was the action that took place, and from that point on, they're celebrating what took place of gaining their freedom. It was done by literally sacrificing a lamb for each family. And the sacrifices for the sin is common in the Old Testament. And the individual basis it was done, but this was done as a family. And it's a clear, this is a clear picture of the Messiah. Do you agree? Okay, can you give me scripture? As a lamb to the slaughter. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 5:7. Now, this is going to bring in a couple of elements of the Passover. 1 Corinthians 5:7 says, "Purge out, therefore, the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us." There's no getting around that. He's showing that, this is Paul writing to Corinthians saying, it's kind of, now you might say, well, do they really know what he's saying? The symbolism is wrong, but it's like saying Jesus is like the Christmas turkey. Okay? It's literally that much ingrained into the tradition of the Jewish families to know what Passover is. Okay? So he's likening it unto something that everybody knows, and it is the sacrifice. The Passover is sacrificed for us. And in John, the first chapter, verse 29, it says, "The next day John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, Behold the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." So not only is he the sacrifice, the Pesach, the Passover, but that Passover lamb is going to take away the sins of the world. So why was one the death angel passing over, and the other one is a sacrifice of sin? Are they both freedom? Well, they kind of are. Because if we think about freedom, when we think about freedom, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. Or do you have the freedom to do the right thing? Remember, we have that we're not bound by the laws today. We are bound by our promise. And as we look at the promise that we've given, we are free to fulfill that. There's nothing that says you have to do these things. It's your agreement that you made with the groom. We're free to do what we want. Did you know that Jesus died during the Passover? Fulfilling something that he put into place 2,000 years before, or thousands of years before, 1,000 years before or so, when Moses initially set up the Passover, God told Moses to set up the Passover. I don't want to put too much on Moses there. Hebrews, the 9th chapter, verse 13 and 14. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of an heifer sprinkled the unclean sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Remember what we talked about last night. That's salvation. But it's so much more. It's the salvation, freedom from sin, to serve. Freedom to serve. They were freed from Egypt. They were freed from their oppression. And you can take the word Egypt and put in sin. They were freed from their sin. They were freed from their oppression. Okay? And to serve God. And we are freed from our sin, and we are freed to serve God. Okay. Now, if we have, okay. What happened was the night was a specific night, and it was the 15th of Nisan, by the way. In the Jewish calendar, that's the date. And that is believe it or not, the one, because our calendar is not the same as the Jewish calendar, that is the one thing which basically is Passover, and that is about this time of year. And it is the one holiday that comes around that is actually probably the truest holiday. Okay, we say Easter is probably the truest holiday, but Easter, believe it or not, is more of a pagan base, and Resurrection Day, which we think of as synonymous with Easter, is not really the right word we should use. Okay, because of the Resurrection Day is when Jesus came, and being Easter being a pagan thing. Anyway, so the meal was to be eaten in haste. What does that mean? Quickly. It's not a gravy. In haste, no. In haste means in hurry. Why do you think that would be? Yeah. It's almost an act of faith. Why are we doing this fast? We're leaving. We haven't left anywhere for generations. This is our home. Yeah, we're leaving. And now think about this. When they left Egypt, they did more than plunder Egypt, because all of the plagues took Egypt to its knees, but Israelites didn't get that, right? So they left with all their cool stuff, and everyone around them didn't have it. So they left. Were they a nation when they left? Yeah. They were literally a family, and they had grown big enough to become a nation. And the Passover was commemorated. The angel of death would come through the camp or through Goshen, and those that did not have it on their doorstep. Now, what happens if you weren't rich enough to have your own sheep or goat to butcher and put on your? What could you do?
They actually had a deal set up where someone could provide it for you.
Yes, and the way that worked was they would bring those people into a family that could afford it, and they would celebrate it together. And they had to be gone, exactly. Yeah, yep, come on in. I'm full, you have some more. So, to kind of look into how Egypt is bondage and bondage is sin and freedom, all of that is really important. But let's look at now what has become the Passover, or had become the Passover by the time Jesus was here. First of all, there was a preparation for Passover. The time of the Passover was actually a full 7 days. And in preparation for that, they ate nothing but unleavened bread. Now, let's take a second, and in your mind, you've all seen it, the Da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, right? And they say, oh, all kinds of symbolism in there. Yeah, but there's all kinds of wrongness in there. What are they eating? Well, actually, they're in the picture, they're eating fish. because Da Vinci was a good Catholic boy, and on Fridays you eat fish. But what else are they eating? Nice big fluffy bread.
Yeah, it's not unleavened.
It's not unleavened bread. So he got it a little wrong. So the unleavened bread, when the very first of it would start, the woman of the house would go through and clean all of the leaven out of the house. Now, big white fluffy, we can use yeast today to get that started. How many people have ever had sourdough? Okay, so how do you make sourdough? You take a little bit from the old and you put it in. That's how, they didn't have the yeast so much as they would use the sourdough from the previous that had already started to turn, which would turn the bread into the puffy stuff. So now can you see the relevance of using a new unleavened lump, which as opposed to taking some of the stuff from the old and bringing it in. It's just to keep that, just a little bit of that stuff, right? No, we have a new lump, a fresh start. So, here's what would happen. The woman in the house would go through and clean all of the leaven out, and then on the evening before this feast would start, the husband or the man of the house would grab a handkerchief, a wooden spoon, and a feather. And he would search high and low because she would leave one lump of leavened bread somewhere. And he would look around until he finally finds it. Now, you can tell if she was having an argument with him because she could either really hide it or put it where she put it last year. Okay? And then when they find it, what happens is he takes the feather and scoops it into the spoon, wraps the whole thing up in, you got to buy Pepsis for all of this now. So, wraps it all up in a napkin. And what does he do with it? He does throw it away, but where? He walks down.
House or kitchen.
Exactly. So what he does is he walks down to the synagogue where there's a bonfire going and all the other men are there, and he throws it into the fire. That's just the tradition of how it happens. Okay? Now, can we see how when it talks about the Last Supper and eating unworthily, and how Paul talks about how we need to remove the leaven from our lives, okay, and we can say that unleavened is part of the old, part of the sin that we bring into our lives. And, yeah. So let's talk about the cedar. The cedar is actually, the word cedar means all-encompassing. And it's the order in which you do. Okay? So the table that's set up is the cedar, and the cedar is a, the word, he's got the whole world in his hand, right? That whole is actually cedar. Okay, so it's literally everything. And it's, therefore the table is set to show symbolically the story. Okay, so the purpose of it is to share that collective experience of the Jewish people from whom God liberated from slavery in ancient Egypt to become his own treasured possession, his own eventual bride, God's bride. The Passover Seder refers to that orchestrated ceremony, and during the Seder, they're going to eat special foods, they're going to say special things, and the ritual is done to explain the meaning of that process, which also illustrates the new covenant. And each one of those steps, if we can make a like type to the New Testament, it brings home how the Lord is the Passover for us today. So imagine this, okay? Put yourself into the shoes of one of the 12. The original 12 apostles, okay? And Jesus has just died. You're in the upper room, and they're all talking around and says, well, you know, he said to go, and I'm going to this part of the world. And I'm going to this part of the world. What are you going to bring with you?
Food, clothing.
Okay. How about, do you want to get some Sunday school quarterlies and a couple of New Testaments? And that's not there. So how are you going to explain to them this thing?
It works.
Through the Passover, through the Old Testament, how the type and shadows of what happened has been fulfilled. And so the Jewish religion, which spread far and wide, the practices, even Melchizedek, who was not a Jew, was practicing the things that were Jewish tradition. So it was known. It was like being able to say, can you see how Jesus Christ is in Thanksgiving? Or better yet, can you see how Jesus Christ is in Christmas? Okay, so they're literally taking a familiar story and using that for their mission work. So they had to, the New Testament believers would literally see this deliverance as given through the Messiah. Just as the blood of the Passover lamb, the blood for each person now, and every generation has to regard themselves or herself as being personally set free from their sin of Egypt, or Egypt of sin. The Seder is not just retelling this old story, but it's an invitation to experience the bitterness, the oppression, because part of what they did, let's talk about it. They started off with carpus, and carpus was was actually a vegetable like parsley or romaine lettuce or something like that, okay? And that was then dipped into salt water. And that salt water was to represent the tears. Now, symbolism here, let's talk about this. And this is in the beginning of the Seder. After the candles are lit and the ceremony has started, there was prayers that were done and songs that were sung. And then the vegetable was picked up and it was dipped into salt water. And the presence of that green vegetable showed the growth and fertility of the nation of Israel during the captivity. But it's dipped in salt water to represent the tears of their oppression. So it was, yes, we grew, but it was not a happy time. We weren't free, okay? Then we have the caroset. And the caroset is an apple and a juice and a nut mixture, and it represented the mortar by which they had built some of the storehouses in Egypt. It also symbolized the toil and labor of those in Egypt. Now, it's toil and labor, but it's kind of a sweet thing. So, yeah, we're working, we're slaves, but look what we did. This is kind of cool. I mean, it is our labors, and it's something that kind of breaks the fact that we're in captivity when we can stand back at the end of the day and see what we've done. Then there's the maror, M-A-R-O-R. And we did it wrong when we did it here. We used horseradish as the bitter root, or bitter herb, right? Is horseradish an herb? What is it? It's a root. Yeah, it's a tuber. And so when I was looking into this in detail, I found that there was this young lady who lived in Canada who grew up in a traditional Jewish family, and she said one day, I am going to do this as much in the traditional way as possible. Because, can I ask you, what do you typically have on Thanksgiving for your family? What? Turkey. How about you? Turkey? Okay. How about you guys?
Turkey.
Okay. Turkey? Is it unreasonable to to think that someone might make prime rib?
Yes. No.
No? No.
That's
So,
what gets eaten first. The turkey's leftover.
so prime rib, right? And maybe a ham. So everybody's tradition becomes a little bit different. And so, yeah, some people will eat lamb, but some people will eat the chicken bone because it's easier to get. And you don't have to eat so much when you have to eat it all. But it's still a bone, kind of a. So when we look at the maror, that bitter herb, it struck her that it's not an herb, it's a tuber. So she said, she actually wrote a letter to the agricultural ministry in Israel and said, is horseradish something that the Israelites could have readily sourced during the time of the Passover? And they said, not even. It wasn't. So, and they said, furthermore, it's not an herb, it's a this. And so, you guys know what milkweed is? That's likely what they were using. Springtime coming up, grab a bunch of that. It's the bitter herb that they were using. It's actually, it makes more sense. Now, that was not an uncommon thing to put into your meals to I hate to use the word spice it up, but you've just come through the winter where all you ate was something that was prepared and maybe even bland. And so having a little spice wouldn't have been a bad thing. So it wasn't uncommon to say, yeah, have some bitter herb on your stuff. Oh, cool, this makes it better. Today we would say, hey, you want some salad dressing or ketchup on that? It's just a little something to add to it, a garnishment. Okay. Then we have the chazeret, which is the inevitable bitter herb, which I don't know what this is, but it wasn't horseradish, but it was something that was so harsh, so difficult to eat that literally could not be eaten. And that was to symbolize the atrocities, the infanticide that occurred, the horrible things that were not just the daily oppression, but the things that were just intolerable. Okay? And then there was, this is interesting, it's actually, think of the word zero, Z-E-R-O, apostrophe A, zeroa, okay? And it's a roasted lamb or goat bone shank that symbolized the sacrifice of the lamb, okay? Now, the word bone is etzem in Hebrew, but the Jewish, through the traditions, they changed that word bone to actually mean arm. Because of tradition, you don't want to go out and get an entire lamb shank, but a chicken arm or leg would be just fine. So an arm or a wing, even, in depending on. So I think it's funny that they said, well, we'll make it easier for us in our tradition to be able to do this. We'll just use this arm. Well, yeah, but think about it. The arm for a sacrifice. They stayed right with what would be a teaching point when they said, yeah, let's not do exactly what they said. We'll kind of do a symbolism. But it meant arm. Interesting. So, and then there is the pizza, and that is a roasted egg, basically. And we don't typically roast our eggs. We boil them or we fry them or whatever. But anyone ever eat a burnt egg? It's not pleasant, is it? And I'm not sure how to roast an egg without getting a little burnt on it. I'm not a good fire. I mean, thinking of a fire, I could roast it in the oven, but I don't know how to do it without getting a little fire on it. But when we think about how we do a hard-boiled egg, what happens, this is basically meant to symbolize the harder things got, the more heat applied, the harder you become. So then there's the saltwater bowl, and that's what we talked about, the Jewish tears, and also refers to the splitting of the Red Sea, and the egg was dipped into the salt water and eaten. So us who went from this green flour to this hard-boiled egg through the tears and through the Red Sea. Now eat this. Now we've come to a point where the entire meal is now served. We're no longer doing an order of ceremony. We're saying, and now eat, fill yourself. Eat as much as you want. And here's an interesting thing that was added in later years. They would allow an orange to be put on the Seder table. And the reason for that was to say, it's not just for us as Jews. If you, as a Gentile, want to come into our Seder during Passover and want to partake, have at it. We want you to see the whole story that we went through as a Jewish nation. And so if you get a chance to be invited to a Seder, I would go. It would be awesome. Now, during the Seder, there are 4 cups that are drank. And it's the same cup, but it's different times. They refer to them as the cup. One is the cup of sanctification. And that is during the cedar of this, it actually is the cup that says, you are going to be brought out. This is the promise, okay? So a blessing is said and they drink the cup. And then the second cup is the cup of deliverance. You are now brought out, the cup of deliverance, okay? Now I know you guys are going, now what's the one we did for the Last Supper? What's the one we used for communion? Just a second, don't get excited, okay? The third one is the cup of redemption. And we can think of that as the cup of betrothal. Remember we talked about knocking on the door and coming inside and having bread and wine? That is literally the betrothal that he did with the Israelites. And then the last one is the cup that I will take you as my own people, and it literally is the cup of restoration. So, and there's a fifth cup that's not drank, and where's it at? It's actually set on a table that no one sits at. Do you remember this? What was that? The cup, who was it? Do you remember who it was set for? No. Who?
Holy Spirit.
Nope. Elijah. Elijah's cup is set in the corner, and the whole place setting, whole entire cedar is set for him. Why? Because in Malachi 4 it says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So as they look for the day of the Lord, they're looking for Elijah to come. So he could be coming, and if he comes to our cedar, we want to have a seat for him because we're ready for that's how prepared we are for the Lord to come. Okay, and yeah. Is this interesting? We've been going at it an hour. Let's take a break. We'll come back in about 5 minutes. Is that cool?